Welcome to the Cyber Insights podcast, brought to you by the Greater Washington, D.C. chapter of ISACA. I'm your host, Jim Wiggins, joined today by my co-host, Mr. Altan Bulut. Our guest is Mr. Noel Nazario, and we'll be discussing the CISO journey, not for the faint of heart. Let's get into this episode. Welcome, everybody. This is Jim Wiggins coming to you from the ISACA-GWDC radio show / podcast. And today, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking with Mr. Noel Nazario. And Noel, let me give you a quick background on him before we actually bring him on and talk to him for a bit. He is basically focused on IT audit, governance, cybersecurity leader with a deep knowledge and a broad professional experience. He moved on to IT consulting and audit roles with KPMG, EY, Grant Thornton. He's participated in federal PKI projects, such as the deployment of the federal PKI architecture. He's combed his technology and audit knowledge to expand technology risk management services. He joined ISACA and acquired the CISM, the CISA, the CRISC, and the CDIPSI credentials. He's got his CISSP and the ISO 27001 lead auditor credentials. And he also founded ELFSEC LLC, which provides cybersecurity, IT governance, consulting, and training services. So Noel, welcome to the show. We're excited to have you here.
I am excited too. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. And Altan's with us here. How are you doing today, Altan?
Yeah, doing great, Jim. It's another great episode we're starting, and certainly a lot to talk about. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely.
Get into a lot of the details.
Absolutely. So, Noel, usually what we like to do when we get started with the podcast is we like to provide I tried to introduce you, but we like to get a little bit deeper into the background of the individual. And was wondering if you could maybe share a little bit about your career journey, how you got started in cyber, how you transitioned maybe into IT audit, those types of things. Can we start there?
Well, that goes way back. I started in cyber almost right after college. I came to Gaithersburg to what was the National Bureau of Standards. Ding, dating myself. And I worked in building research. And because of funding things, I pretty quickly was asked to look for another spot. And I ended up, to make the story a little shorter, I ended up with the Computer Security Division at what is now NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And like I like to say, it's a wonderful place to grow up. I spent 13 years there, and I did very interesting things. Met some of the people that actually invented the internet, and that some of the pioneers in cybersecurity and cryptography. Not all of them worked there, but they were friends with my leadership at that point. So it was a great opportunity. I worked with a bunch of different agencies, and with ANSI, ISO, IEEE, and what used to be the government open systems interconnection platform. Gossip. It used to be Gossip. So anyway, now that I completely dated myself, that's how I started in computer security. Was computer security. The cybersecurity name came a little bit later.
Yeah, absolutely. What about influences? Who's influenced your career? Is there any individuals or group of individuals that have had a significant impact on help you becoming who you are today?
Listen, certainly being at NIST was a huge influence. It was not only one of my earlier jobs, or basically my earliest experience, professional experience. But some of the people I worked there really focused on communicating, and they had a fantastic ability to communicate extremely complex concepts to just about anybody. And that's something that it was a superpower that I really tried to emulate and focus on, and with mixed success, but it's certainly something I focused on. And in writing, and not leaving loose ends and being thorough, it was something was cemented on me from the very beginning, which is a blessing and a curse, because it means I always have to work harder at just meeting my own standards. But
Understood. Hey, the focus of today's podcast is on the CISO, and I know that you've been a virtual CISO at one point. I didn't really get into it in the intro, but can you speak for a moment about your background or your experience and having done a little bit of CISO-related work and activity from a professional perspective?
Well, yeah, that's the part of the journey part. I started being my background was in computer engineering, and just kind of evolving with that into more of a computer science, and then specialized in cybersecurity. All the work I did with developing standards and working with international organizations, interfacing with industry leaders, that were putting out newer technologies and constant evolution. And then when I left NIST, I of all places, I jumped into audit and accounting. I went to KPMG, and that was learning a whole new language. And while being there, it also put me in positions where I had to focus on leadership, management, growing a book of business, at the same time that I was learning the audit language, and just getting more into the industry side. And then that led to wanting to expand and give back more, right? When you get into the audit area, you see a lot of the underside and where the problems are and where things are lacking, and it kind of drives you to want to help and make things better on the providing side. So that was the motivation. So I was CISO for a part of the Department of Treasury, working in intelligence analysis. But I got there before getting there. I took a turn and did enterprise architecture and security architecture, and I did that for Metro, WMATA, the Washington Transit Authority, and then for the Fairfax County Public Schools, which was a fantastic experience. So that's kind of how I got there, and I've seen a lot of environments and how being able to compare and contrast, and not only within government, but in industry. I've done work for commercial entities, and it is always a matter of focus. What is the guiding principles for the organization that leads you.
So Noel, when you look back in your career over the last couple of decades, what do you consider some of your greatest achievements overall? Well, something that you're proud of the most.
Beyond the personal growth which to me it's a huge evolution, but I did very seminal work for public infrastructure, work with very smart people at NIST developing specifications for different components to foster interoperability between those components. So we partnered with commercial organizations, some of the leaders at the time in public infrastructure technology, and we put out these specifications because we thought public infrastructure was a very important tool for assurance and for security in general that suffered by being extremely complex and having a lot of components. So it really needed some help. And actually that prompted me to kind of move to the commercial side to see how I could foster that from the commercial side, from the users and the actual implementation of things. So that was one of the highest ones, and certainly working with different organizations in training and mentoring other professionals is something that I consider a big accomplishment. Not only because I like to give and I want to pay it forward what other people did for me. I also like to solve problems and make sure that there's the professionals out there can benefit from whatever I can contribute to improve technology, improve security, and make technology more responsive to the customer.
That's really awesome.
So I wanted to ask a question. You talked a little bit about your background as a CISO at different organizations. And since that's really the focus of today's podcast episode, and I wanted to ask, what do you think, from your experience and your background working at a number of those different organizations, what should really be the CISO's top priorities today? Any thoughts on that?
Obviously, cybersecurity, right? Improve that to the maximum extent, but the CISO is tasked with bringing and bridging that to the organization, looking at the business and the mission, and understanding how what they do translates into better services, into data security, privacy, all these very important concepts as technology continues to be the main tool for our economy, for the way we work, provide services, consume media. It's so ubiquitous, and there are so many areas of expertise out there that somebody has to be able to bridge those gaps and communicate up and address cost and return on investment, and bringing the right mix of technology. So it is an orchestration of all that. All those languages and modes of speaking, so that you can get the most benefit for the buck.
So any thoughts on how you kind of characterize both opportunities and challenges? Mm-hmm. How does a CISO try to overcome or try to take advantage of some of those different situations?
Well, you have to listen. Like in most things, you have to listen. You have to be very aware of the mission, organizational mission, but also the mix of factors that gets you to success. Being personality, being the business or the mission of the organization, the constraints, just trying to understand the motivation for your customers. Your customers are not the organization in general; they're people, And everybody has different motivations and limitations and needs and wants. So there's a lot of bridging those gaps and trying to bring understanding and support and showing what can you do to make everybody else succeed.
Yeah, sure. When it comes to the challenges CISOs face, like in the recent past, we've seen some actions from regulatory agencies directly reaching into CISOs in terms of like what reporting should have been made or what should have been addressed. How do you see CISOs effectively dealing with those like dynamic environments and being ready to counter any of those things and being in a position that could be both easily defensible and also justifiable, and also having the safeguards around some CXOs enjoy by default, for example, having that liability insurance and those kinds of peace of mind around that, so that you can focus on doing your job rather than worrying about what might come next out of nowhere. How do you see those challenges?
You know, when you come from a technology mindset, you don't think about a lot of those risk management and personal risk things a lot. You're kind of focused on the technology. So it's a challenge. And unfortunately, some people in some organizations have looked at the CISO as a stopgap. You know, you go and have this impossible mission of safeguarding everything with limited resources, because obviously it's difficult, it's complex, it's costly, but it's not the mission of most organizations. So it's not part of the business. So it puts people in tough positions. A friend of mine, another very accomplished security professional, I share with her that my first, love, the place where I saw myself providing a lot of benefit in the immediate future was in CISO roles, and she's like, "Why do you want that? You're gonna be in on the receiving end of all the negative stuff, and you're gonna be liable for problems, and organizations keep firing CISOs every time somebody screws up." And it's like, well, but that's where my heart is, right? That's where I think I can provide benefit. And yes, you have to think about how you can protect yourself, protect your career. There's always risks about not meshing up with the rest of your leadership, of people having, thinking of other areas are more important, either for their own role, for, personally, organizationally. So what the best you can do is be very conversant on the different motivations and the different drivers around you, and how you can be successful at the same time that you make the organization be successful, and be aware of the regulatory framework that you work within, so that you can help yourself and help the organization meet their responsibilities in that realm.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of very technical, very accomplished people have anxieties around being on the spotlight of a CISO, and being maybe the scapegoat if something goes wrong, catastrophically wrong, maybe like disasters in terms of like cyber incidents, being the person to answer a lot of questions. A lot of people have concerns about that, and the responsibility that comes with it as well, obviously. The organization-wide, like you're the person to answer those questions, either internally or externally. So that makes a lot of people worried even to step up to that challenge of becoming a CISO in the first place, and let alone like dealing with the ongoing stress. So, I mean, what I was like what I'm trying to get to is that, do you see a reliable way to engage with the board or maybe the senior management to have that maybe a little bit more established? Like, what are the boundaries and what can CISOs be accountable for? Like, and at what point their hands are tied, for example? Like, sometimes you might advocate for change or implementation of a controlled alignment with a framework, but maybe that the senior management doesn't feel that it's compelling, so that they may not be aligned with you 100% on everything. So in the end, like, how do you make sure that you don't get accused for something that you had no control over in the end?
Well, I guess you have to come to terms with the fact that there are no absolutes. You will never be completely assured that you are safe. You are in an inherently delicate position that requires a lot of technical knowledge, but it also requires a lot of experience, a lot of communication, a lot of fitting within a bigger framework, and understand that is an occupational hazard. And how you do that? Well, how do you manage that? It comes to having the best relationships you can. That does not mean that you're going to agree with everything. That means that you have that you listen and that you try to communicate your points, and you try to work within the constraints put out there. And just understand that you can't be sure. There's no silver bullet that is gonna protect you in every situation.
And do you see any value in having those written down, like maybe insisting on getting insurance for some protection, or maybe putting that into your contract or in your job description? What can you be liable for, etc. Those things.
Well, a lot of the C people have their golden parachutes, right? Those are those are not available to everybody. And yes, some organizations are going to be better than others about how they treat people and what protections they offer. Not everybody offers that. I have another friend that is a CISO, and I asked her about that, personal risk management factor, and how does she feel about being in that position. And she said, well, I don't have that problem in my job. So, well, good for her. That's good. That just is reassuring that, some organizations are going to be more responsive to that type of need and that type of the safety and the security that their professionals need to have at that level so that they can be effective. So, what does that mean? Try to choose the best you can. It's a combination between what's available to you and what you can pick from, right? Sometimes you go where you need to go.
Awesome. Thank you. Hey, I wanted to kind of explore the role of frameworks. In our world, everybody knows about, the NIST cybersecurity framework. They know about the 800 series publications from NIST, the ISO 27000, COBIT. I'm just wondering, from a CISO's perspective, what do you think the role of the framework does? And maybe if you could talk a little bit about how dependent you think CISOs are in terms of the framework, or, from your estimation, do CISOs tend to just kind of use them as kind of guidance and do their own thing? What do you see out there in terms of the role of the framework in helping try to promote the program to help secure, the cybersecurity requirements of the organization?
Well, you've been in technology for a long time, so do you know the answer is it depends.
Of course.
So if you're within the federal government, the U.S. federal government, you're mandated to do certain things, right? And they're done in different ways. In some places do it better than others. But But there is something to hang on to, right? And the risk management framework, the RMF, which is very extensive and has gone through a number of refinements, is very useful, but it's huge, right? So you have to prioritize things, but not only that, then you have to report, and then you have to test internally, and then you have your annual tests. And there's something called the Federal Information Security Modernization Act, that FISMA, where there is a process, there is a law that you have to comply with, and OMB has a role, and Congress has a role. So there's a lot of checks and balances, but even within that, it's a lot of work, and there are a lot of people that don't like that, and it can be an uphill challenge to get a lot of your own techies to buy into it, right? We like technology, but we don't care much. Risk management is difficult, and it has many variables, and it's not always embraced because of that complexity. So, and then if you're in industry, you have things to comply with, COSO, SOX. It depends on the regulations that apply to you, and some of you can perhaps meet those being a little looser. The ISO 27001 standard, something that is supposed to be applied uniformly worldwide. There are a lot of problems with that I see with relying on that, and it certainly has a strong technology component, but the implementation of it, it gives me pause a lot of times in terms of, can I rely on this? What assumptions can I make? And, a check mark is a check mark. It may get you through certain thresholds, but when you are under attack, if you are not thorough in implementing and having all your ducks in a row, the certification is not going to save you. It's the actually implementing and trying to get the maximum benefit out of those controls that you maintain.
Understood. Beyond the frameworks, are there other tools, for example, maybe other standards or other guidance that you consider that are useful from the CISO's perspective?
Compliance is king in a lot of environments. So you have to look at what is regulation telling you to do, right? And that's the main impetus. Very few customers buy because you comply with something, because you have a label there. Yes, there are some that are sophisticated enough that look at that as some level of assurance for their third-party risk management, for example. That's where it's important. But that's not very uniformly used and accepted. And even organizations that put an effort and realize that that's a problem struggle with that, because how deep can you go in terms of managing the provenance of code, for example? That's the one that is really complicated. There's a lot of reuse and adaptation and theft of it, and what is just brought over because somebody knew an environment, and the provenance of those things are hard to track. And there's a lot of shortcuts that are taken, and those can be dangerous. So you have to look at, number one, common sense, and trying to prioritize where you put your efforts. Always is a mantra of access controls, change control, and segregation of duties. Those things will get you so far that we focused a lot from the IT audit side on those three, and basically expand from there. But if you cannot even do those well, you're not in a good position.
Understood. I did want to ask you about the interaction between a number of different ideas that influence and have impact on an organization's security program, specifically the intersection of things like enterprise architecture, security architecture, cyber, privacy programs, risk management, third-party risk. How do you balance all of those, in some ways complementary or in some cases competing outcomes relative to the overarching security program? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. You can't have everything you want. So you have to look at, for your environment, for your set of constraints, for the support, leadership support, organizational support you get, the areas where you can have more leverage and influence, those will tend to dictate where you start and what things you strengthen and focus on, at least first, right? Just in terms of priorities. They're all important. There's a lot to say for quick wins and, perhaps going for the ones that you can achieve easier. Given that all these are of very high priority, very high importance, we're not even looking at, second tier things. So once you have identified your highest priorities, just try to go for what you can achieve, first. That's kind of the practical hat. The other thing is looking at your regulatory environment. That is going to give you a lot of ammunition and is going to give you create support and buy-in. If I don't comply with this, I really can't do my business. So that is clear and easy to present and to communicate up to the decision makers, and to the organization in general. There's something concrete that you can point to. There's a carrot and a stick. Those are tangent. Or tangible. So you look at those, and that's where your first areas to focus on, could be, and that's gonna get you. It's gonna get you pretty far. It's gonna get you pretty far looking at those priorities, because they're real. The other thing is where you have audits, right? Audit findings are also an incredible motivator for support and for the resources that are needed, because if you're failing an audit, well, that says something about your organization, and to the point that is going to be material to the business, to the mission of the organization. So those are kind of like my three little pillars for support.
So, Noel, I want to talk a little bit about the impact, as far as how you see it, of the various and numerous compliance requirements and regulations that continue to come and evolve over time, and many of them have overlapping requirements for organizations that they may need to be in compliance with across the board for multiple frameworks and multiple regulatory requirements. So how do you see, on net, in terms of their effect on a given organization's cybersecurity posture? On the one hand, you might imagine that ensuring that organizations comply with a framework or a regulation that concerns their activities would provide you the baseline, so that you would not be overlooking some significant component. But on the other hand, you might imagine that there's this concept in psychology called moral licensing. So when you do something good, it might give you some level of freedom, or maybe a little bit of a, I don't know, psychological or maybe just having your conscience kind of satisfied with what you have done already, and like you just covered the basis, and then maybe you don't need to move further, and you don't need to do anything further than what is required by the regulation. So do you see that, like, overall organizations, like, after they've checked the box, do they feel like they want to move even beyond their requirements to make sure that they're robust and something that they consider a core part of their business in terms of cyber risk or computer security risk? Or do you see that once they satisfy the regulation, they just kind of feel apathetic overall? How do you see that on balance impacting the real risk landscape?
That's a very insightful question, I'm afraid I'm not being very diplomatic in answering them. But hey, this is the technology the technologist at heart here. Yeah, thank God for the overlaps in terms of requirements. Thank God for the overlaps, because if all the requirements were different and they didn't overlap, that would be terrible. So when regulatory requirements overlap, they usually point in the same direction. They're not at odds, those requirements. So you can leverage them from one framework to the other, from one response to the other. So you can, one control does not break the other. It tends to build upon.
Yeah, it checks
right?
multiple boxes.
It does check multiple boxes, and and you don't have conflicting direction from those in general. There's in general the regulatory areas, having worked in multiple standards efforts, they leverage of each other, and there is a sense of what is a good control, and there's a lot of effort put into harmonizing those requirements. So that's a good one. Then you talked about the psychological or financial or personality-driven push to just do the bare minimum. Unfortunately, that can be, in some environments, that is a survival strategy. If you can only pull the blanket up to cover yourself to the extent that you're not exposing your feet. So you have so much to work with in terms of coverage. So if you pull too much on that, you'll be exposing something else. So maybe that's what you have to do to survive and be able to make progress in your current situation. But it doesn't mean that you're not going to strive to take advantage of that and get something more, right? Those are constraints, so you have to be aware of that. But you also have that drive to make things better. Yeah. And then when new technologies, new risks come in, you want to be in a position that you can manage those too.
Being proactive.
Being proactive. So it's always, it's a balancing act of, being able to stay in a position where you can be effective within the environment you're operating, and to satisfy that urge to leverage and expand service and expand that protection and to adapt to changes.
And there's always the concern about the regulation coming after the fact, like a massive breach happening, or maybe new disruptive technology being introduced, and then there's that gap once that regulation gets put in place. Like, what do you do with that? Like, if the appetite is to be compliant, and that might be a challenge for CISOs, I might imagine.
Yeah, usually regulations do not precede crisis.
Yeah.
They're usually, band-aids.
Reactive.
And they're reactive. That's the correct term. They're reactive because they can be onerous, and they deviate resources from what is perceived to be your mission and what is available for remuneration, for earning. So it kind of eats up on that. So you have to have a real good reason for that. And then, there's a number of tools there, and sometimes you just have to do your due diligence and understand what is the state of the practice as opposed to the state of the art, just so you can balance that and maintain a reasonable level of protection, a level of service to the organization.
So Noel, you talked about the idea that regulation usually does not precede crisis. Love that. That'll be the theme of today's, or the tagline that we'll use in today's show. It's a great way to characterize it. But with that being said, any thoughts on how cyber professionals, risk management professionals, however we want to refer to ourselves, IT audit professionals, how do we try to maintain risk awareness and be able to handle a lot of these emerging risks? It seems like it's a double-edged sword, right? On one hand, we kind of rely upon the regulations to tell us what we need to do, but as you suggested, it doesn't really precede crisis, so we almost have to wait for something bad to happen. But you kind of almost hope that the organization is trying to get ahead of that curve. So how do you get ahead of that curve? Any thoughts?
Well, some regulations are very prescriptive, right? And you have to do what you have to do to meet them. Some others are more at the policy level, where you have objectives to reach. And when you have objectives, then you have a bigger responsibility for filling in the gaps, for finding what those specific controls, the practices are that will meet those policies and requirements that are kind of high level. So, and then you have a little bit more leeway into how do you implement that and how you achieve it. When it comes to new technology and what that represents, well, there's no other than to stay abreast, to read up, to take training. I have my own personal feelings about having to, demonstrate that I'm up to date, but I'm thinking, yeah, but what about everybody else? And how do others know that I'm up to date? So, that's that role of the certifications, for example, and the continuous training that you have to have. So that goes a long way into making sure that people stay current. And you just have to keep up and identify reliable sources of information. So we're blessed with having the NIST computer security there, and NICE, and all those things coming out of NIST, and having Ron Ross, the patron saint of cybersecurity professionals, pushing all these things and sending these constant reminders on LinkedIn and in whichever way, and showing it up in every conference you go to, and then other people. That from this and other organizations that do that and not only serve the government, but they serve the technical community in general. So ISACA and the local chapters making the effort to bring people on all the time to share the knowledge. That all the time I spent on the board of ISACA-GWDC, the bulk of my time there was looking for people to share their knowledge and to make sure that we could pay resources, and that we could have the tools and all to communicate that. And when the pandemic came, that shifting to virtual training and just all that adaptation that had to go on, so we could continue to nurture the knowledge of the professionals in cybersecurity, in IT audit, governance, all those areas. So there's no substitute. You have to find the tools there to stay current, and you have to know the technology, and not always at the same level. You have to be able to explain something in simple terms, but you also need people that can go deeper into the weeds of how you actually code those. So there are different levels that you attack, but you have to know. And I'm an advocate for knowing the basics. As much as things change, knowing the basics will get you 70, 80, 90% of the way in terms of being competent in your job. If you understand the concepts. AI, make sure that you understand LLM, that you understand the language models, that you understand what the parts of it are, where the risks are. If the risks are on the input area, if they are in the data area, in the training area, in the looking at what the results are, in the information coming back to you as a response to your queries. There are different areas and different techniques that you can use at every of those levels, but you have to understand how the technology works. Maybe not everything, but at least understand the concepts. And you do that with quantum, and you do that with, zero trust, and every buzzword out there has a model behind, has a technology, and you should understand those basics.
So that was a really good explanation from the user's perspective. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about it from the organization's perspective, right? So I understand that the user has to stay up to date, has to understand what's coming, and there are a lot of tools out there, there's a lot of opportunities. What do you think from the CISO's perspective when they're looking out across the organization and looking at their security program? What do you think are the biggest challenges that are keeping them up at night? Is it artificial intelligence? Is it quantum? Is it the evolving regulation? What do you think the CISO today is trying to be forward-leaning on in terms of the emerging tech and the emerging threat landscape?
As a CISO, my main headache, my main worry is my ability to communicate and educate decision makers and, top leadership as to what are the risks and how they affect them and affect the organization. That, to me, is the highest challenge. Dealing with people, explaining GRC, governance, risk, and compliance. Why should they care about this? And granted, they don't need to care about absolutely everything. You're going to have a huge amount of stuff that you worry about on your own that is for you to address. But you have to have the support, and you have to have the buy-in, because there is a cost to it. And you have to be able to communicate that. And that is a high challenge. Come up with, metrics, numbers, things that are tangible. And, granted, a lot of times there's a lot of poetic licensing into trying to come up with those metrics. Because you're just trying to convey meaning. And in some environments, you have better venues for establishing relationships and maintaining relationships where you don't have to, try to corral somebody into listening to you, but that you have more opportunity to establish a continuous dialogue where there's an exchange of information. They tell you what their goals and constraints are, and you tell them what what are the things that can affect their ability to get there? What are the things that can affect them in terms of an incident or a loss of branding efforts, right? You have a reputational cost to things. There's a need to have that, and that to me is harder because it's a mixture of human nature and dollars and cents at the end of the day. It's not a procedure for a computer that is A, B, C gives you X, So to me, that's the biggest challenge.
Understood. I wanted to also ask you about overlooked aspects of a cybersecurity program. As a CISO, are there things that you saw or that suggested to you, like organizations should really focus on something that may not be necessarily front and center? We've talked about people, we've talked about skills, we've talked about emerging technology, we've talked about controls. Are there any other aspects of the program that we sometimes don't pay close enough attention to that we probably should?
Well, it's not limited to what we understand as security awareness, but is very related to it. Everybody in the organization should understand what their role is in terms of protecting the operation. Anybody at the users, everybody's a user of technology at one level or another. They need to understand the appropriate use for that technology. They need to understand what their role is in the bigger risk management picture is. Not only are they using this technology to do their jobs, they also need to be aware of the things that can go wrong. The key example is, learning about email security and phishing, right? That's something that every security awareness training it's includes, but there's a difference between being provided the information and ingesting it. So it's a constant need to think about ways to make everyone feel invested into the security and how they can affect them in terms of, okay, how can you lose your privacy, for example?
Is that the same thing as culture? Is that what I hear kind of you allude to, is this idea of building a culture, and that's kind of oftentimes overlooked? Am I oversimplifying that?
Culture is part of it, right? Culture is a very basic concept, so is extremely broad. So making cybersecurity, making risk management, making technology usage part of, in appropriate ways of using those, part of their culture is important. So yes, culture is really broad, but what I'm talking about has to fit within it.
So, Noel, you mentioned that effective communication with the decision makers in an enterprise being one of the core pillars of a CISO's job and responsibilities, and perhaps one of the more challenging ones, especially for a lot of technical people. So, I wanted to get your perspectives on that. You've also founded a company, AlpSec, right? So, how did that experience shape you in terms of perhaps being able to appreciate the perspectives of a business executive or the people who are more concerned about the survival of the enterprise and have to consider a lot of aspects outside of cyber too, like financial, operational, legal, they have so many things to think about. and then cyber is one of the things that they need to get inputs from experts and from subject matter specialists and all sorts of other things. So how did that shape your perspective as a professional, and how did that make you perhaps a more effective CISO, if it did, in your view? And on top of that, I also wanted to get your thoughts on, like, what would you recommend to CISOs, like, who may not have had the opportunity to manage a business or found a company in that sort of way, to get into the mindset of a business executive so that they can be more effective communicators in that regard?
Well, the short answer is affected me immensely. Even though HealthSec is a very small enterprise, it makes things tangible. Just going through that process make those concerns tangible in a way that reading about them or just seeing how people in positions of responsibility behave is not enough, because every time you see somebody and you work with somebody, you're only seeing a portion of what they do, right? You're only seeing a small part of it. So even at a small scale, I'm sorry, it's very illustrative. You have to. It brings all those concepts and all those concerns that are external to the technology into focus, and it also makes you look at your use of technology in a way that is different. Once you put up a website there, you have responsibilities for that website, for the content, for the security of it. It makes it very obvious that you have to comply with things. You have to comply with the licensing portion. You have to compete with the tax portion. You have to comply with occupation rules. It's like to the city, whether or not you're operating from the right place, and all those things.
And there's also there's the, like, making sure that the business is profitable and all that, like,
profitable.
user perspective, like experience, making sure that you don't, like, overburden your users and maybe your employees to a certain extent too.
Right. And at the end of the day, you have to make a buck, because otherwise you can't stay there.
Yeah.
So, it makes things so incredibly tangible. And I don't know if it's reasonable to suggest that everybody go out and establish a business. To me, I didn't do that as an educational tool, but boy, that was the first payback I got. Was the educational component of doing it. Well, Jim, you have a lot of experience doing that, because we've been working together for a number of years, and you running your business. There's no substitute for it, but it may not be practical for everybody to start that. So maybe looking for opportunities to shift gears professionally as you move up, and have different sets of responsibilities, not just stay in audit, but maybe cross to, if you're running in operations, maybe go into audit, or go to a different part of the business if you have the opportunity, even if it's on a temporary basis. There are ways that you can get exposed to different points of view and understand the organization from completely different perspectives.
Just for a full-time CISO, or maybe a senior technical professional, let's say, what do you think would be perhaps easiest way or maybe the most viable way to get that business perspective? Like a lot of people I know that consider maybe going back to business school, maybe full-time, part-time. Do you see that, for example, as a viable or valuable thing, or do you find any other alternatives that might be easier to go through?
Everybody's journey is going to be different depending on their situation, right? Sometimes you can stretch yourself into joining an educational program and going for an MBA, for example. And yes, you will learn things, but not every educational opportunity is the same. Starting a job, a business, will educate you about certain things, but it may not be enough in the environment where you want to grow. So I guess, personally, you have to look at what works for you in terms of opportunities. Things have costs. Who's going to pay for it? Can you meet your other personal responsibilities? Can you afford to go to school and still make sure that your children are taken care of, right? So everybody has different constraints, but there's a variety of things. There are different types of programs available that are educational. There is rotations internally within jobs, within organizations that can be useful. Volunteering with groups like ISACA and it can give you a whole different perspective and expose you to a number of things that you may not be exposed to when you are in your data center day in and day out. So just get out there and think what you can do different. Anything you can do different will give you a new appreciation, and talk to people, listen to other professionals. If you find somebody you want to be like, or a role that you would like to see yourself in, ask for an informational interview. Some people are generous about sharing their time with other professionals. And it doesn't work with one, that doesn't mean that all doors are closed. Talk to other people. Just keep your doors open and try to do something different as often as you can.
Hey, Noel, I wanted to ask you a quick question about the future of the CISO role. How do you think it's going to look in 5 or 10 years? How do you envision it's going to evolve? Any observations based on your prior experience, based upon the regulatory framework you see out there today?
Well, I can look at it from a standpoint that is not going to change a lot in 5 years, or I can, and by changing a lot doesn't mean that there won't be change. It means it's going to be the same type of change, as in terms of staying up there with technology. Just keep, never stop learning. That's a given. That's it. A lot of whether it's going to change, it's going to depend on whether the business world can see it in its advantage to change the role. Is it going to be part of the actual C-suite where there are additional protections, perhaps, where the role is not expendable? When something goes wrong, this is the first one I get rid of, and that is used as a signal that I did something, got rid of the CISO. He was responsible for this, but then you leave everything that made the CISO, stuck the CISO in that position intact. So if boards evolve, then there will be a significant change. where the role may be less dangerous personally, career-wise, and then there has to be other incentives, personal incentives and drivers to keep that producing. How are you gonna, justify in dollars and cents that? But in terms of learning, that's not changing. You have to learn, and what is going to change is the technology. Need to comply? No. Well, you have to stay up with compliance requirements. They're going to change, not the CISO role, because the CISO is responsible for making you, getting you to compliance. That's not going to change. And in getting to security, that's not going to change. So, yeah, that's my answer. It probably won't change much unless there is that modification, which is kind of external, and very business driven.
Understood. Last question for you, Noel. How do listeners engage with you? How would they contact you if they wanted to? Maybe email address, website. How could they learn more about you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Noel Nazario. On LinkedIn, I'm happy to share the information with ISACA out there. Although a lot of the people at ISACA leadership know me. I show up frequently to ISACA-GWDC events, so that's one way to connect with me. There is ELFSEC LLC, and info at ELFSEC LLC, elfsec.com. Info at elfsec.com is one way. And Noel at noelnazario.com. So I'm easy to get a hold of. And a lot of people do, and I appreciate that. Unless, they're trying to get me to buy things I can't afford to buy.
All right. Well, hey, we want to thank you for coming in and sharing your knowledge, your experience, and most importantly, your expertise with our listeners. That's going to do it for today's episode. We want to give a quick shout out to the ISACA-GWDC chapter. If you're interested in learning more about the Greater Washington, D.C. chapter of ISACA, please visit www.isaca-gwdc.org. And Altan, any final words of wisdom?
I mean, it has been really insightful. I can't thank you enough, Noel. There's been a lot of topics that we dug into today, so it can be an eye-opener for a lot of people, especially for those who haven't thought much about some of the challenges that CISOs face. So that's been really, really valuable.
Awesome. All right, everyone. Well, thank you very much. We'll look forward to seeing you at our next broadcast. Have a great day.